Okay, I think we are at 12:45 East Coast time, but on the 45, so I think we can go ahead and get started, everyone. Hello, hello. I'm Laura Sloan. I am the Accessibility Manager at Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts in New York City. I'm going to start with a visual description of myself and then do a little access check so that we can do some housekeeping. This is a new platform for me, so I'm going to try and direct people to where they can get to the chat and where the Q&A is. Okay, so visual description. I am a Middle Eastern woman with light olive skin. I have long dark hair. I am wearing a headset with a microphone attached. I am wearing a floral shirt with lots of different flower colors on a black background and then a black blazer over that. And I'm sitting in my tiny studio apartment in the corner of my tiny studio apartment in Manhattan. And there is a white wall behind me with a framed world map. And at each corner of my screen, there are plants peeking out. I have plants everywhere in my apartment. I also, in the left corner, at least it's on the left in my screen, there is a fire escape window. So there's the window with some of the bars in front of it. That's the fire escape. Okay, access check. To get to the chat, there are two tabs on the right side of the screen, event and session, and I learned this as I was testing things out. If you want to leave us a chat in here or chat with us in this session, you're going to want to be on the session tab. So just make sure I think that's the default, but make sure you're in the session tab. And then below that, there are options for chat, polls. We won't be doing any of those today here. People to see who's in the space with us, and Q&A. I'll just ask that you're welcome to introduce yourselves in the chat. You can say your name, your position, where you're coming from. And if you have any specific questions, if you could drop that in the Q&A part so I can keep an eye on that and keep tabs on that throughout the session. And again, like at any point, you can put stuff in the chat and say hello. I like to use the Zoom meeting function whenever we have our programs and meetings, because then you can see faces and it's easier to see everyone in the space. So please say hello in the chat. I'll be sharing some slides during my presentation. Another thing I learned on this platform is if you double click, you can either maximize or minimize the video or the video that we're going to be sharing or the slides. So you can do that on the window to maximize and minimize. You can also hide the chat bar on the side if that helps make me or the presentation bigger on your screen. I want to give a land acknowledgement too. Myself and Lincoln Center are based in Manhattan, New York, which is on the unceded land of the Lenape peoples. The name Manhattan derives from the Lenape word for island. And each time we say the name Manhattan, remember that we are evoking the memory of the Lenape people. I ask you to join me in acknowledging the Lenape community, their elders, both past and present, as well as future generations. As today's participants are not all based in Manhattan, if you have not already done so, I encourage all of those attending to also identify the Indigenous lands on which you reside. Okay, so getting started, I'm going to share my screen. And here we go. Okay. I think you can see this, but if not, or if you're having any tech issues, oh, thanks, Laura. All right, I see in the chat. Thank you. More land acknowledgements in the chat here. All right, so I'll be describing the slides too as we go. And if you have any questions or need me to slow down, you can put that into the chat as well. So this is, our first slide is my title slide here. It's an aerial view of Lincoln Center at night. There's lots of lights lit up. It's the cityscape. You see the NYC skyline, and at the center, open plaza and fountain, which is at the heart of Lincoln Center's campus. On the lower right, and what you'll have on every one of these slides is the logo, Access logo. It says accessibility at Lincoln Center in black text, and to the left of the text is the universal design, the universal symbol for accessibility, which is the person rolling in the wheelchair, and it's in blue. So today we're going to be, the title of my presentation, Lincoln Center at Home, Accessibility on the Virtual Stage. And then we have the conference and the date, April 23rd, 2021. I'm going to be using a lot of theater puns. So as I talk about virtual stage, just be forewarned, there will be that coming. And today we're going to be discussing best practices for adapting in-person arts programming to the virtual space and ensuring virtual accessibility in that pivot. And we're going to also be discussing the importance of a multisensory approach to online programming for participants with disabilities. And that's going to be through two examples here of case studies at Lincoln Center. Our Moments program for people with dementia and Alzheimer's and their caregivers, and our Passport to the Arts program for people with families with people with disabilities. Okay, so my next slide is our run of show, pun intended, our agenda for today. So we're going to start off with a warm up. I really want this presentation to be casual. I want people to feel like they can chat and ask questions. We're going to be doing some interactives, not only to demo what we do in our programs, but also to hopefully give you some kind of a movement and breathing break after hours and hours of sitting in front of the computer all day, which is honestly what the pivot to virtual has been for our work. We're going to then go into program overviews of Lincoln Center Moments and Passport to the Arts. And I'm going to tell you about what these programs, how they were structured and what they are in person. And then we're going to talk about the pivot to online programming and how what's changed. And then we're going to talk about what's like lessons learned from that. We're going to have another intermission. We're going to have a little bit of a movement break and a breathing break in between. And then we're going to talk about, these are terms we often use with our classes, glows and grows. So lessons that we've learned, things that worked really well in our switch to online programming, and grows, things that we've learned throughout when we were doing online programming and ways we can improve. And then we're going to look ahead and just see what the future is for virtual programming at Lincoln Center. And I'd love to hear from all of you as well about the programming you've been doing and what you see the future direction of that going. Okay, so we're going to start, before I switch to the next slide, a fan favorite that we've been using in a lot of our programs and our online classes for students has been a mood meter. I'm going to type that into the chat, the mood meter. And this is such a flexible thing that you can do anything with. It's basically a way of gauging where your participants or your students are at, how they're feeling. You could do it at the beginning before you start a program. You can do it at the end, gauging how they feel after the program, or in the middle, or anywhere in between. And it's a way to provide multiple entry points for participants to engage. So you can show images and number them, and people can hold up the number of how they feel. They can embody the face and the energy of what they're feeling. They can say what they're feeling. So it's really allowing people, they can type it into the chat. So really any entry point that is accessible for them, they can do that with these mood meters. And you can also choose any type of images to use. So it could be something related to your programming. For one of the ones we've been doing with students, we've been using the many faces of Drake, the rapper. So it really, you can gear it towards your audience as well. And you know your audiences. So it's totally flexible. But for ours today, I was inspired by Lincoln Center and all of the performing arts that we feature there. So I pulled a lot of these images from our website and videos from our YouTube pages. I'll describe these, but as I'm describing, if you already know what number you're feeling like right now, you can put that into the chat. If we were on a Zoom meeting, for example, I'd invite you to also hold up the number. I unfortunately can't see you, but you can hold you can show the face, how you're feeling, can embody that and move that way in your body. You can hold the pose, but you are welcome to put a number into the chat based on how you're feeling. So number one, we have Nathan Lane, a fan favorite. He's kind of chuckling, mouth half open. He's got his teacup and he's arms crossed over his chest. We have a woman who's looks like she's praying almost. She has a hopeful expression. Her hands are clasped in front of her and she's looking up towards the sky. I see Laura's a solid 7. Laura B is a solid 7. Ellen is a 5. A 5 is looking a little wistful. Looking maybe like could be sad interpreted. 4 is a very active pose. 2 dancers on stage, one of them mid-leap. 5, hands on hips. This is another on-stage performance. She's wearing a really cool looking bodice and shoulders are bare and looking to the side very dramatically. Number 6, Billy Porter is in mid-song, head back, mouth wide open, wearing a tux and a red bow tie. And then number 7 is from a Holi, H-O-L-I, a Holi presentation. So there's colors being thrown. This woman is covered in bright colors and has her hand up above her head and eyes down, mouth into a slight smile. See, Jim is a 1, just poured some tea. It's great. All right, so mood meter shown as a way for you to just warm up your audience, get a good entry point, a way to engage and have a conversation, and a multimodal entry point so that people can hold up a number, say a number, put a number in the chat, or hold a pose and have conversations about that. Great. So a little bit about Lincoln Center. If any of you have been to Lincoln Center or, even if not for a performance, if you've been to New York and gone past Lincoln Center. Oh, Tina put it too. Thanks, Tina. So you know what? Maybe we do the mood meter again and see if your mood has changed at the end of this presentation. You're also welcome to put in the chat if you've been to New York and Lincoln Center, and just even to walk around campus if you haven't been to a performance. But it is a huge, huge space. There are 11 resident organizations. It's 16 acres. 30 different theaters, 6 million visitors annually in person. On the left, I have a campus map, and it's very huge. And this, to be honest, a lot of it is not very accessible. It was built at a time where things weren't being built with people with disabilities in mind. And so our team has had a challenge on making sure that we can make Lincoln Center a very accessible and inviting and welcoming space for people with disabilities. We've indicated accessible entry points on the map. We've kept that in mind as we've transitioned to the online programming and digital space too, to make sure that we're making things accessible and welcoming for people with disabilities. Lincoln Center's founding principle is that the arts are not for the privileged few, but for the many. Their place is not on the periphery of daily life, but at its center. This is a quote from Lincoln Center's first president, John D. Rockefeller III in 1963. And really what that means for us in practice is that everyone has access to an equitable and meaningful experience. It's a welcoming entrance to the performing arts, and that diversity makes us stronger. We really want our staff, stages, and our audience to be reflective of the diversity of our city, and that includes people with disabilities. I'm going to pop that quote also into the chat. I realize that I said that fast, and it's helpful for people to see that. Okay. Any questions so far? I'm going to take a pause. Okay. Let's keep going here. All right, so diving right into our programming. The 2 programs I want to tell you about are Moments and Passport to the Arts. So starting with Lincoln Center Moments, on this slide I have a lovely picture of our in-person programming. I'm going to tell you about that now, and then I'll shift to what the program is like online. So in person, we have, and in this photo too, we have this bright, airy room. There's a whole wall of windows, and there's flexible seating set up. So these are seats that could be moved, shifted around, wheelchair. There's accommodations for wheelchair spaces here. And then to the left is the stage part of it where there are performers. So we essentially set up a performance space for our audiences to come in a relaxed environment. This is during the day. There's bright light coming in through those windows. And the idea of Moments itself is really founded to be a relaxed and welcoming performance space for people with disabilities. Specifically, this program is for audiences with dementia, memory loss, Alzheimer's, and their families and caregivers. Traditionally, we know that the performing arts may not be a traditionally welcoming space in the sense that there's a lot of restrictions around performances. In the opera or the ballet, you might be shushed if you cough too loudly, or there might be a lot of evening performances and not a lot of afternoon opportunities. Evening performances can be tough for these audiences. This is a relaxed environment, so there's no strict call times. So a lot of times if you don't make it to the opera in time and the doors close, you can't get in until intermission. And so the idea that this is a relaxed space where people can come and go, people can interact, people can get up and move if the music moves them, is really a way of welcoming these audiences. The program was established in 2016, and research and training support by Mount Sinai, Beth Israel, and the Louis Armstrong Department of Music Therapy. We had additional training and outreach support from Caring Kind, the Heart of Alzheimer's Caregiving. They have a Connect to Culture program, which also has been a wonderful outreach. It connects a lot of the arts and cultural institutions throughout New York to these families. And so it's a way of outreach. It's a way of also knowing what other organizations in the arts field are doing in the city. So we're connected not only to participants, but also to other colleagues, which has been a really helpful growth during this program. Some more goals of the program too have been really ultimately to give people this wonderful experience, affect mood, affect the closeness between the caregivers and their loved ones, to really deepen understanding of their loved ones' abilities and interests. Also on the flip side too is empathy building and reducing stigma, not with staff as well. The front of house staff that works our programs, a lot of them may not have had exposure to people with disabilities or people with dementia and Alzheimer's. And so kind of connecting that, being the connector between non-disabled audiences and staff and people with disabilities has been a real advantage to the program too. I mentioned before about the relaxed performance space for reflection and expression without formal restrictions. And then this idea of community building too. That's super important for us, for all of our programming, especially for people with disabilities, as we want them to feel like they're with other people that are in a welcoming and respectful space, and they get to know each other. And often a lot of them hang out in a community outside of Lincoln Center too, that community building. I'm just seeing a question in the Q&A part. Are these programs offered free of charge or are they grant funded? Thanks, Laura. Great question. These are all free. For the programming for people with disabilities at Lincoln Center is free of charge. So Moments is all free and Passport to the Arts is all free. We do have some grant funding as well. So we have grant funding that helps support the program, in addition to funds from Lincoln Center itself that are supporting and dedicated to these programs. I'm also really realizing too, not to back up too much, but I'm realizing when I mentioned Lincoln Center, I mentioned 11 resident organizations and I didn't mention the organizations. For those not familiar, there are a lot. Some of them you may know already, some of them you may not realize were connected to or affiliated with Lincoln Center. For example, Juilliard is on Lincoln Center's campus. It might be hard to see from this map because the text is kind of tiny, but Juilliard is all the way on the left in that larger square that comes off into an edge there. Lincoln Center Theater, the Metropolitan Opera, New York City Ballet, We have the New York City Public Library for the performing arts, so we also have a branch of the public library on campus too. So we have all of these different jazz at Lincoln Center, a lot of different names, some of them that are big, some of them Chamber Music Society of Lincoln Center. So all of these are parts of Lincoln Center's campus. So I keep referring to the term campus as a whole of all of these organizations. Okay, so just to kind of give you the big overhead view of Lincoln Center Moments, to kind of zoom in on the types of programmings we have and the seasons that we have. We have 2 seasons that we've been holding. I'll get to how COVID has kind of put a wrench into things, but we typically pre-COVID and in person for this program, we had 2 seasons. In the fall, we had a season, and in the spring. And we would have 6 to 8 programs each season. So this is a calendar. Actually, this is a snapshot of part of our brochure that we have for our fall 2019 events. And the brochure includes, we had a film festival with the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. We had performances by Solis. We work with a lot of those organizations that I mentioned are on campus. We call them our constituents. So we work closely with a lot of them. One of the benefits of being at Lincoln Center is you have access to so many amazing artists and performers and organizations. So we do have great connections with them, and we bring them in to work with these audiences. We often try and match in person. We had an 11 a.m. and 1 p.m. performance. So some days we would match up a morning and an afternoon performance to give people an opportunity, if they preferred mornings or afternoons, to come in for programming. And we try and build in a variety of styles and genres. We really want this to, in addition to reaching people with dementia, maybe where their generation is at, so the music that they heard growing up, music can be a great connector for people with dementia and Alzheimer's. It's often the last thing to go as the memory goes. Music can build and bring back some of these memories that otherwise may not be activated. So we really want to build in some programming that's really their genre. And then we want to also introduce them to new styles and new art forms. We had a program, I think it's on here. It is Los Hacheros, so more Latin style music. And after that program, we had one of the participants approach us and say, "I've never heard this type of music," and they really loved it. So that idea of, no matter what age or stage you're at, you can still be exposed to new things. Okay. So a little bit about the way that the program is structured. So traditionally in person, these programs were 2 hours, and we divided them up into 2 parts to kind of, we wanted to reach people at the performance level, so they feel like they're coming in, they're seeing a top-notch performance, they're in a room like with a stage and performers and an audience, same as people might come to a performance at the opera or performance in an evening show. So they come and they enjoy a performance that's about an hour, and that includes the audience interaction. So we might have introduction from the artists, Q&A with the artists. The artists come in with us having told them about do a little training about the audience, so they understand if people mid-performance stand up and start to dance, or mid-performance call out and start to sing along. So that idea that this is a relaxed performance setting. And they'll come in and they'll enjoy that. And then the second part to this is that we have a workshop in a smaller setting. So after the performance, after the hour, we move into smaller rooms. So these are smaller spaces, and we divide into smaller groups. So this is usually about 3 different rooms for small group workshops. And these are led by a pair. We have a teaching artist and a music therapist that they work together to facilitate the activities in that room. And we really wanted these workshops to be, they were a very important part of this structure of the program. not only does a smaller group workshop allow for more individualized attention, individualized participation, it invites the participants to engage. It's a more they might feel more welcome to engage in a smaller setting, maybe less embarrassment than if in a whole audience they're called on. So having that smaller setting, and then we also make sure to incorporate discussion, movement and music, and art making. So the idea that there's these three different levels that we're reaching people at to provide multiple entry points. So if someone is non-speaking, they may not participate in the discussion, although they may be listening. They may not be vocalizing during the discussion, but they may love the movement portion. Or for those with more limited mobility, they may enjoy the discussion part. Also for those that really respond to art making, that's the way that they're expressing themselves. We wanted to make sure that we're offering these different ways to engage, so there's multiple ways for people to express themselves. We usually open with a exploration of the theme and a discussion of the performance. And our education team creates a guiding question around the theme. And then that's a way to kind of focus in all of our discussion and our movements and our art making, helps narrow down to a more engaging and understandable theme and question. Just going to take a breath. Any questions so far about moments before we move on to our next program, Passport to the Arts? Okay. Okay. So going to move on to Passport to the Arts and talk about that. So Passport is our programming for children, teens, and adults with disabilities and their families. Sorry, not to back up, but I realized I didn't describe the photos on the last slide. I'm going to back up just one tick and go back to my last slide just to tell you about the photos on the right. The right at the top is an example of one of our art making projects. These are two participants that are using glue and cut out pictures for collage activity. And below that, on the bottom right, is a semicircle of seated people, and they have their hands raised up above their heads, and it looks like they're calling out or singing out. And so these are two examples of the structure of what it would look like in our small group workshops. Okay, and I do see a question from Jim. Thank you. A few questions. Can you talk about where the audience lives? Great. Yes, I will get to that. And then the other question is, how do you prepare performing artists for these programs? Are all artists usually willing, or do you have to seek out performers who want to participate? Excellent questions. Okay, so I'll get to Jim's question first. Can you talk about where the audience lives? So because these are in-person programs previously, I'll talk about the virtual and how that has changed. But the in-person programs, it is usually people who can access Lincoln Center physically. So they're usually in Manhattan. Most of them are in the borough of Manhattan. A few of them are in Queens, or they might be in an outer borough, Queens or the Bronx or Brooklyn. We might have one or two from Staten Island as well, but it is tough to get to Lincoln Center from outer boroughs. If you haven't visited New York, the public transit system is not perfect. There's a lot of problems for people with disabilities accessing public transit. There is Access-a-Ride, which is this kind of ride service that will get you to and from. There's issues with that too. A lot of people have said that they'll be hours late because Access-a-Ride doesn't come on time, or it never shows up. So there are barriers to getting to Lincoln Center. This is something that we are working on and something that we want to improve going forward with the program. We have considered, and this is also where grant funding can come in, about busing programs, like that you can dedicate a bus or a car service specifically for this program. You organize it, so it's not done through the city, and you can ensure pickup points for your audience. It can be a pickup point in a borough or at their homes. So we are exploring, and actually we were in the process of exploring this when COVID happened. So we had to put that on pause, but for now, primarily audience in the New York region that is reachable to get to campus, but hopefully in the future when we're back in person, that this is something we can work on. And I'll talk about in a moment, I'll talk about the virtual pivot because we've been able to reach a lot more people through online programming. I love the question about how do you prepare performing artists for these programs? Are they usually willing? Do you have to seek out performers who want to participate? So this is where our programming team, so Lincoln Center is a pretty big place, big organization. We have a programming team that they are the ones that are organizing and structuring programs throughout Lincoln Center. So they're not just structuring programs for moments. So we actually go to that team and we talk to them about who are some artists that you've worked with, who are some performers. Can you tell us a little bit about them and their style? Do they feel comfortable working with these audiences? So for artists that are coming from outside Lincoln Center that have worked with the programming team, it's nice because we already have a little bit of exposure to them. We know that they've already performed at Lincoln Center. We know who's worked with them. And so we kind of have insider information about their style and willingness. Which has helped a lot. When you're working with new artists coming in, I know it can be tricky. You don't know. I mean, you get a sense of maybe you can see videos of their performances. Maybe you can see a performance, but knowing how they will work with these audiences can be a question mark. So we've had that benefit where we have a lot of insider info on the types of artists that have come in the past. And we've also developed these relationships with the other orgs, our constituents on campus. So for example, we've worked with the New York Philharmonic and they know our audiences. And so it's kind of been scaffolded where we've worked with them for many years and they'll know which one of their, either the students that they're working with, like we've had some Juilliard students, or they know what artists have performed that would be a good fit. But we always do meet with the artists in advance. We tell them what to expect. I think the key things we'd be looking for are personality. Like, do they have a flexible and welcoming personality? Are they open for possible interruptions during the performance? These are things that I think I would look for in any new artists coming in. And the willingness to learn. So, they might have a style and a way of doing things, but are they open to switching things up because it would work better for these audiences? These are great questions. Thank you. If you want further clarification, please pop some more in there. And yes, Jim, Manhattan in the winter is tough. Often we have to walk everywhere, and getting down up and down those subway stairs without slipping is really, really tricky. Yeah. Okay, so our Passport to the Arts program. This program, I think, has changed even more than our Moments program in the switch to online. It's our programming for children, teens, and adults with disabilities. So there's a broad range of ages that we're working with. We don't ask about disability, so it could be a broad range of disabilities. Could be neurodiverse audiences, could be physical disabilities, and anywhere in between. So we try and make these programs as accessible as possible and offer accommodations as needed. This primarily began in 1989 as an introduction to the performing arts for children, specifically an introduction as free programming for people with disabilities to give them an entry point into the arts and remove these barriers that are typical with a lot of performing arts, including costly performances, high prices, inaccessible spaces, inaccessible program design, and a lot of the same barriers I mentioned before with the Moments program apply for this audience as well. This program is essentially also works as a free, so there's two branches to this. It works as a free ticketing program. So our team will purchase tickets to programs that are already happening around campus with different constituents. So if the New York Phil is having a family program, we can buy tickets and then provide them free to our families. Same with the ballet and any of these other organizations. But also the other branch of this is that we do have workshops that we either we might buy out a whole program. So it's just for our families to come in. And then we also host workshops, which are more of the interactive, like a ballet dance workshop. And those are very interactive as opposed to sitting for like a seated performance or seated show. These are all free as well, and they're designed, the workshops especially are designed in a relaxed style and curated for our families. And relaxed in the same sense that I was mentioning before, with moments where it is designed for these audiences in mind, with the pacing, the content, the not having strict doors open and close times, no shushing, so this kind of relaxed environment too. And the same here, we do want to expose our families to a wide range of programming and different styles. So we have diverse programming, dance, theater, music, different styles of these things too, and just making sure that they have that broad range as well. Some of the dance workshops we've done are through New York City Ballet, American Ballet Theater. Some drama workshops we've done through through New York Public Library for the Performing Arts. We've had backstage tours at the Metropolitan Opera and opera performances, and New York Philharmonic, jazz, chamber music society performances as well. So now I'm going to switch. And again, if you have any questions about how they were in person or not, you can always pop that in Q&A and chat. I'm going to pivot now to virtual programming. And I'm going to talk about, on this slide, I'm going to talk about why. And then on the next slide, I'm going to talk about how. So I think I want to start by the importance of why continue this virtually. There may be some obvious reasons, but I think there's some that had not occurred to us that came up as we started developing our thoughts for live virtual programming and what it would look like. I think that when COVID started, a lot of people expected us to get back in a month, or a few weeks, a month, a few months, we'll be back. And it's been a year and over a year, and our campus is, we're just starting to reopen outdoors, but we have not reopened any of the indoor performance spaces for audiences. So much longer than we expected. And so I want to start with the why here too. And then I'll talk about tips and structure and lessons learned. So the importance of continuing virtual arts for programs for audiences with disabilities. There is I'm wondering if I can put this into the chat. I'm going to try and copy this link for you. There is a study that came out recently. Yep, here it is. Okay, there's a study that came out on the impact of COVID on Alzheimer's communities. I think this community especially, of course, it affected our passport families, and they've been struggling with COVID too, but older adults in general got hit super hard with COVID. And then people with Alzheimer's especially have been impacted. And hopefully that link went through. Maybe not. So the impact here, this is a study from Us Against Alzheimer's, and it fielded its 8th survey on the effects of COVID-19 on people affected by Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. This study was done from February 26th through March 3rd, 2021. So this is a very recent study. And the survey essentially outlines the more severe declines seen in memory and behavior for those with dementia during COVID-19 closures and isolation. I mean, we've heard a lot in the news about the deaths and like a lot of, especially anybody in nursing homes and senior living facilities. Thank you, Drew. Nursing homes, did you put the full link in the chat? So the impact physically and on the deaths that have happened, especially those in group settings. But this specifically highlights too the idea of the impact on caregivers and the decline in memory and behavior on those with dementia and Alzheimer's. So the higher stress levels seen among caregivers and the effect, it's just been tremendous. So yes, we want to provide this programming because there is this intense need for it. The effect on families too. So thinking about our passport families, the ages range from young children all the way through teens and adults with disabilities. But a lot of people, for example, on the autism spectrum, neurodiverse people, upending routines were also a huge dramatic impact and hit on them at the start of COVID, taking away their community connections and their social outlets. It has been a dramatic shift. And so we wanted to continue these connections with our communities. We wanted to also continue this commitment to our artists and educators. If we could go ahead and continue paying artists and continue paying our teaching artists and music therapists to facilitate these programs, that is a benefit as well to the whole larger arts world in general. Another thing that we found too is that with some actually thriving in a remote learning and online environment. I'm going to try and copy this hyperlink again. And Jim, you got me, right? So if this doesn't work, hopefully that works. All right, so there was a study too that I just saw online that I thought I'd share about children thriving with remote programming. Some people with disabilities did find that remote programming and learning was better for them. The example in that is that there was a young man with epilepsy that had trouble in school because he needed to get up and walk around, and having an online learning environment in a space that was familiar to him, in a safe space, he could do that. Okay, so and please, I'd love to hear from you too if you have other reasons, things I've missed, things that are important for your programs too. So now pivoting to the how of virtual programming. So how did we do this? So when COVID hit, again, we thought, oh yeah, this will be quick. We just have to ride it out and it'll be done soon. So we started immediately by creating these at-home websites that we could immediately put content online. We could build lessons around that and send it to families right away, so that there was at least something, because COVID hit at the beginning of our season. So we had several in-person programs, and then all of a sudden stop. So we didn't want to cut a whole season massively short. We wanted to provide them with something. And these would be available anytime online. They were done with pre-recorded videos that were already streaming on Lincoln Center's YouTube page. And then we just built content around that, and we created activities around that. And we even recorded some videos about how to for activities. So it's essentially stuff we could work with really quick. We didn't have to worry about lining up artists, or at that point too, we didn't know what online live programming was going to look like. We hadn't tested that out, so we could at least get something out there. And so the pictures on the right is Lincoln Center Moments at Home at the top, and then Lincoln Center Passport to the Arts at the picture on the bottom there. And I'm going to try again with these links, so hopefully they work. If you'd like to poke around on the sites, I just put up the link for the Moments at Home, and then Passport to the Arts is coming next. Here's the link for that. And we have a question. Let's see. Do you think that you will continue any of these virtual programs post-COVID? Great question. That's the question I think a lot of people are asking. What is the new normal going to look like? I'll get to that towards the end of the programming, but I am hoping that we continue some kind of hybrid of offering virtual and back in person, because I think it will reach a larger audience, and especially after having built out people that can't physically access, as we were just saying with Jim's question, like if you can't physically access campus, then once we go back in person, and if virtual stops, are you just kind of left out then? So thank you for that. We did this. I 100% am not a technology person. I've managed to put links in the chat, but normally not a technology inclined person. And I still was able to do this. So you can too. So the idea, these sites were put up through Google Sites, which is quickly structured and easily editable, and you can add things to it easily. So we did this to ease the burden on our production and web teams that were working on Lincoln Center's main page. Lincoln Center redid their at-home page too. So right when COVID happened, they were doing a lot of web work. And so this was a way for us to not having to wait in the queue for all of that. We could just get these up and going and share with our families. Also with Google Sites, you have Google Analytics. So you can easily check out who's looking at your site, how many people, you can get all of the stats, especially if you have to report out stats to grant funders and all of that. You can easily grab that from a Google site. No shade to any of our production or web team. They're amazing, but this was a way for us to move quickly and not put an extra burden on them. Okay, so this was the immediate pivot once we were in quarantine. We then wanted to take some time to reassess once we realized COVID was going to be much longer, to reassess and then figure out how to best structure programming for our upcoming seasons in the fall and the spring. How are we going to structure that? So by this point, it was about approaching summer 2020, and when we were doing some of this, and we really wanted to listen to our families. Programming built for people with disabilities should include people with disabilities. So we really want to hear from them in the creation and the structure and the building. So what we did is we had these focus groups. We called them family feedback sessions, and we met with them virtually on Zoom. And we had focus groups, and then we also sent out surveys to the larger groups of families that couldn't join us or didn't want to join us for the feedback sessions. And so we collected a lot of feedback about how is COVID affecting you? Where are you at now with, wanting to have arts programming, and how can we get you that arts programming? Essentially, I'm really kind of narrowing it down, but the idea was this through all of these meetings, and we heard a lot that asynchronous materials, so these websites with the do-at-home lessons, weren't helpful for them at the moment. That for a few reasons, because a lot of parents now had to juggle being teacher and somehow virtually work and somehow still be a caregiver or parent. So this was at a time, it still is, but early on in COVID, where there were so many issues to getting kids up and online and in school. There were issues with having enough caregivers in a nursing home or a group home facility. So the idea that a lot of people were juggling a lot of things, and they didn't necessarily have time to sit down with a lesson, facilitate it, and help out whoever that they're caring for. So the Google Sites, we decided to put a pause on those, and we decided to pivot to live programming. This was also another big point of feedback, is we want live engagement. We want that sense of community. We miss being in person. We really miss being on site. And so we want that live engagement. I'm going to pause a minute and check out the Q&A. And Laura asks, how did you recruit your focus group participants? So we luckily, we have kind of a built-in group with these programs. We have our mailing lists with all of these families that have come to programs over and over. And so when they come to programs, they're on this larger mailing list. So we were able to just really speak to the communities we're already working with these programs for Passport and for Moments. And a lot of them are very engaged with what we do. A lot of them have been coming for years. And so they've grown up with these programs. So then a lot of them were already inclined to tell us how they feel, vocalize what they need. So I think we were lucky in that regard of having a built-in group of people to talk to. And really, they're the ones getting the programming too. So it was a nice feedback loop. Okay, so adapting virtual programming. So when we decided now we are going to shift to virtual live programs on Zoom, we knew that COVID was going to go on for a while longer, and we wanted to create virtual seasons for the fall and in the spring. Right now we're in the middle of our spring season. And our seasons go from fall and spring. So that was fall 2020 and spring 2021. And before I forget to describe the picture on this slide, I'm going to do it. On the right, towards the upper right, there is a picture that we took a snap during one of our live programs. This was during a live event for the Moments program. Although this group of artists was wonderful to work with, and we worked with them for both Moments and Passport to the Arts live virtual events. This group is called Music from the Soul. That's soul, S-O-L-E, like the soles of your feet. Leonardo Sandoval and Gregory Richardson. Leo is on the left and Gregory is holding the bass on the right. Leo is leaning in, clapping towards the camera. These were wonderful artists to work with, and they were totally open to adapting an approach. I'll talk a little bit more about that when I talk about how we helped train the artists and make accommodations for live virtual programming. So we wanted virtual live seasons. We made a conscious choice to we have Zoom accounts at Lincoln Center, so we're using Zoom. We did a lot of research on what might be a more accessible platform, and Zoom ticked a lot of the boxes we were looking for. We made the decision too to host these in the meeting setting in Zoom, not webinar. So in the meeting format in Zoom, you can see all of the little boxes and people can see each other. You can spotlight people, different people, and have them come in and out of Spotlight. In the webinar format, you can only see the people spotlit. You can't see how many participants. You may or may not be able to use the chat, but the webinar is very much more geared towards a lecture style, and we wanted this to feel like a community group workshop, like we were in person. That's what we were hearing from families. So yes, we wanted to do that in a meeting format. Every program that we did incorporates engagement on some level. So these, again, same reason we didn't want to use webinar, these were not meant to be passive performances. These were meant to be engaging, dynamic programs. We only had one program that we had planned as a watch party. That was for our Nutcracker program, where we got to see the full production of Nutcracker. But even there, we tried to insert a little bit of engagement. When we had intermission, we had an activity that we did together during intermission, and we actually had a ballerina, a ballet dancer who was in the production, talk at the very beginning. She joined us to do an introduction, and she demonstrated some moves that we would see in the ballet, and we did them together. So the idea that if even as a watch party format, you can still insert some kind of engagement, that it doesn't feel like you're sitting participants in front of a TV and setting and forgetting. Because of Zoom and limitations on sound and who can be sharing sound at the same time, for these, we do work live with the artists, but we also have pre-recorded performances that we share. So there is this blend of, now we're going to watch a short clip of a pre-recorded performance. And the nice thing there is you can see a performance recording of a stage. It can be a full production with costumes and set backgrounds and all of this. And you can show a clip and then come off of the sharing and then do your engagement activities and your discussion. So there is this juggling you can do in Zoom that is great for these really interactive programs. Some of the changes from in-person programming. So the length of programs and performances did end up changing. And the styles changed up a little bit too. I had mentioned before that our Moments program was 2 hours. It is tough for anybody, and especially for specific audiences, seated in front of a screen for a very long period of time. And so we adapted that. So our Moments programs virtually are 1.5 hours. And we really try and build in performance interspersed with engagement throughout. And so we'll share a pre-recorded performance, we'll have an engagement. And I mentioned those discussion, movement, and art making elements. Those are all still happening. But we also shortened the length of performances. So unlike being seated in an audience among your peers, watching a performance on stage for 1 hour, sitting in front of a computer and watching 1 hour performance ends up feeling like TV, and that's really not the goal we wanted. So we'll have clips that are about 7 minutes or so, give or take, because we really got feedback from participants too that when the first few times we tried it live, showing longer clips, just you start to lose focus and attention. So shifting the length of the programs themselves and performances. For our Passport seasons, these also adapted. The Passport in-person programs, a lot of that was us providing free tickets to programs that were already happening with our partners, with our other constituents on campus. A lot of those organizations hadn't set up programming yet. So in a way, we got to build our whole season from scratch and work with artists on every program to build a program from the ground up, which was such a cool thing and a really great direction to go in for this program. So curating these specifically for these audiences. Um, Also, for the passport programs, for the Moments program, those are just for audiences with dementia and their caregivers. Passport programs, some of the tickets we would give to these other programming happening around campus, they were open to the public, which in a way is a nice exposure to people, able-bodied people, that they're exposed to people with disabilities and building disability visibility. But the programming online, we wanted to make this a space just for our families, our passport families, and families with people with disabilities. So this did end up becoming like a shift to a more program curated and designed specifically for these audiences. Other changes too is that we got to work with artists from all over. Again, we mentioned before, like the physical limitations of having an on-campus in-person performance. The artists were coming and joining us from all over. We could access them from wherever they were at, just with a computer and internet connection. We had more engagement with the artists. So for both programs, we got to work with the artists so closely on how this would look virtually, which performances that we should use, what is your live engagement going to be like, giving them some suggestions and ideas. And so this was such a growth and a learning opportunity for the artists as well in styling that and what accessibility looks like virtually. Also learning for everybody, the Zoom tech. We started using for a lot of our Moments programs language interpretation. So we had Spanish language interpretation, captioning. We made sure captioning was available for all of these programs. And speaking from personal experience, doing the back end tech with spotlighting and switching to captions and doing all this was definitely a growth and a learning experience of just the technology itself. Okay, I'm gonna move on to really how can we make sure these things are accessible for everybody, not just people with disabilities. Some of these things are helpful for everyone. So for our at-home websites, the Google sites, Google has built in a lot of accessibility, and um, YouTube, which I think now is owned by Google. So YouTube, basically you can caption all of the videos. YouTube has automatic captioning. It's not the best. So we made sure to go in and caption any videos we were sharing on here, and caption videos on Lincoln Center's at home and the Lincoln Center home webpage in general too. We provided alt text on the images. So for those of you not familiar, for screen reading software, if you roll over an image and there's no alt text that has been kind of tagged in the back, it's just going to show either it's going to say a number of whatever the title of the image was, or it'll just say image or photo, and you won't get any contextual information. So providing alt text, which is a description for your image, is really helpful and essential for people that using screen reading software. High contrast large print fonts, making sure that is readable and accessible for people with disabilities. Clearly structured activities, making sure that our programs were structured in a scaffolded way and in a very understandable way, and that they were paced well. And for a lot of our sites at home, we were able to also have our teaching artists record themselves doing the activity and then putting it up. So participants could read how to do the activity, they could watch how to do the activity, and listen to how to do the activity. We also put on the sites printable versions of the lessons so that if people prefer to print it and do it from a printed copy, they could do that too. For our live virtual programs, we wanted to, I mean, and in person, but I think with virtual, we were able to enrich these materials so much more, the pre-program and post-program materials that we provided. At the right towards the top is just a snapshot I took of one of our visual schedules that we provide in advance to families joining our passport programs. It is so helpful for anyone, especially helpful for a lot of people on the spectrum. They having a clear structure, knowing what to expect, and then following that structure is really helpful. So the program schedules include very clear, first we're going to number one, number two, we're going to do this, number three, we're going to do this, and then having visuals to pair along with that. We were able to, these were provided to families coming in person, but virtually what has been a silver lining of COVID has been the ability to kind of easily switch between a video and back to a live instruction or a lesson. You can, if you're doing a site at home activity, you can pause and come back to it. So this ability to pace yourself, and for the live programming, our ability to help pace at a reasonable rate, and then to provide links afterwards or before. So watch it again, or know who you're going to see, and so they'll get to see the artists and what they look like or sound like before the program too. Additional resources as well. So where can you find out more about this artist? All clickable afterwards on a post-program or pre-program email. And then we sent out surveys after every program to try and get as much feedback and data as possible. Um, for all of our programming, we ensure that there's captioning available. Zoom, so we hire a CART captioner, C-A-R-T. So basically, this is a live captioner on the programming, which is more accurate. But I will say, if you're not able to hire a live captioner, Zoom functionality, their built-in captions are pretty good. So I would encourage you on any Zoom meeting, internal, external program, just flick on the captions. I think that they're helpful for people. American Sign Language. So we've been working with ASL interpreters, and the amazing thing that Zoom upgraded, they must have heard feedback too, and they upgraded so that you can spotlight multiple people. So you can have the performer and the artist or the educator, whoever's leading the program, spotlight alongside the interpreter. Audio description is worked on with our artists. So the question earlier too was about how do you prepare the artists and work with the artists for these audiences. We meet with them in advance and rehearse with them, and the just showing them how and demonstrating how you can build in audio description into your programs very subtly too. That doesn't feel, so that, you know, kind of eases them into realizing, okay, this is something that I can do. So when I say audio description, it's essentially describing what is happening in your screen or what is happening in the video. And so for a lot of our movement and dance workshops, it has been really helpful and a learning experience too for us to work with the teachers to say, now we're going to put our left leg up and our hand is going to sweep above our heads, and essentially just asking them to describe every movement that they're doing. For audio description of a lot of the films, this is something that's a bit trickier on Zoom. If you are not specifically sharing a video that has already had an overlay of audio description, we have found a workaround that the person sharing the video wearing a headset can also share audio, and you can talk over, which is tricky too, because you want to prepare a script. You want to make sure you're doing it in a meaningful way, that you're not drowning out or affecting the performance. I will share that we did try and use, we hired an audio describer to be on one of the language channels so that you could switch to that channel if you wanted to hear the audio description of the recorded performance. That is not an ideal solution, because when you're on a language channel, we do offer also Spanish language interpretation on our Moments programs. The speaker on that language channel drowns out whatever sound is happening in the main room. And when you're trying to watch a performance, you want to hear the sound and the music along with the person describing it. So our best solution has been, and we've done this on verbal description programming for people who are blind or have low vision, where the person screen sharing the video will prep the script, make sure they've timed it right, and then we'll talk along with the video. I'm going to take a pause if there's any other questions. Okay, I'm conscious of time too. I want to shift now to a short intermission. And I'm looking at the time, and I know we don't have that much time left. So maybe I'll just maybe I'll tell you what this activity is, and you can stretch along if you'd like, and then I'll just play a segment of the Nutcracker that this activity was designed around. So on the screen right now, it just says intermission, and there is a photo on the center that is a picture of our workshop for Moments. So this is a Moments workshop where there's a group of adults seated in a circle, and they have their hands up in the air, and they're in the middle of a movement activity. So this is something that you can really do for any audience, any age, as a movement activity, as a breathing activity. And I'm going to use an example that we did with our Nutcracker program. Again, I mentioned we had a Nutcracker performance for both audiences, Moments and Passport to the Arts. We screened the entire production of Nutcracker for Passport, where we had the whole performance video play, which was a 2017 production of the New York City Ballet. And then for Moments, I had mentioned too, especially with that audience, that seating them in front of a long performance is not going to reach them. So there, we always use shorter performance clips, and then we integrate that with activity and discussion in between. So the theme that we had and the question that we had around that revolved around gift giving. So the idea in Nutcracker is that this started with a beautiful gift, the gift of this Nutcracker doll to the young lady at the beginning of the production, and she loves it, and then she has this dream about it, and that's the whole fantasy of the Nutcracker. So we really pulled on this element from the production. There's a lot that you can do with different themes. You can pull wonderful things out of productions and then build a thread with that theme. So we built the thread of gift giving. And so the activity started, really, we wanted to scaffold this throughout the program. And so we started by inviting our audiences to think about, what does it feel like to receive a gift? And then think about that. What is the best gift you've ever received? Think about that. And how did you feel like when you received that gift? Where did you feel that in your body? I'm sorry if I'm moving fast. I'm just conscious of time. So where did you feel that in your body? Okay, so let's see if we can breathe in that feeling. Let's breathe in together. And now breathe out that feeling to someone you want to share with. And then we breathed out together. This is pretty awesome on Zoom, where you can see everybody doing the same movements on the screen. And then we did a movement activity from this. So not only the breathing in and out, then we started scaffolding to, like, now let's picture holding that gift or the feeling of that gift. And then we're going to pass it to the person on the Zoom screen above us. And we passed it above. Everybody did this, super cool to see. And then we passed it to the left. And sometimes you could see people doing it the other way because mirroring on a Zoom screen. And now pass it to the person on your right and the person below you in Zoom. And then we would demo this a few times without the music. And then we would play the music together and do these movements as the music played. Just to insert some music in here, I'm gonna go ahead and share that. I think I have to stop sharing my screen. And then I'm gonna share the YouTube link in here. Okay. And now we're going to pass that gift to the person above us and the person to our left and the person to our right. And you can hear I'm sound sharing and talking over it so that you can hear the music and me. And this is a clip we could show in advance and then do together with the music. Sorry to cut us off. I love that music. And you can find that on online on Lincoln Center's YouTube page. That video is available. Yeah, so that's just one example, and I'm so sorry that we had to rush through that, and you probably didn't get the movement and breathing relief, but hopefully you maybe stretched yourself, got up off the chair, danced along. These are all things that you could do with any age group. as long as you're doing it scaffolded and at a good pace, you've introduced what the activity is going to be. In theory, we would show the video performance and then do the activity with just the sound share. But I don't think on this application, Hopin, you could just sound share. So I wanted to show you a bit of the video so you would hear the music too. Okay, I hope everyone's still with me. Any other questions so far? Thoughts on the activity? An alternate activity we did with Nutcracker is playing the video clip so they could hear the different parts of the song and then sections of the song that repeat, and then assigning people to sections of the song. And then you can do like A, B, A, and then if you're doing that too, having a color and a letter or number that you're holding up is super helpful too as a visual for your audience. So saying it now, now A is going to go, oh, now it's B again. And so then there's lots of cool and fun things you can do on Zoom, taking advantage of the structure of the online environment. Cool. Okay. All right. I'm going to shift to all of the lessons that we learned and are still learning. I want to talk a little bit here about our glows, and I have a little emoji of a sun here. This is what I'm referring to is essentially what's been working well, what we've learned works really well, and what we want to keep doing with the virtual programming. And then after this, I'll show a slide to talk about grows, areas for improvement. I see something in the Q&A. Okay, question, what do you mean by scaffolding? Thank you. If I go into educator lingo, please stop me. Thank you so much. When I say scaffolding, I really just mean is the same way when we give participants a visual schedule, is like the idea that when you introduce an activity, you don't jump right in. Okay, everyone, we're gonna imagine gifts. Now let's give our gift. Let's give our gift. Instead, what you're doing is you're building little rungs of like a scaffold to get to where you want to be. So with the visual schedule, it's like, first we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this, and then we're going to do this. So for this activity, it was first we're going to take some breaths together. Then we're going to think about what the best gift, then I said, like, think about the best gift you've ever received. Then I want them to really embody it. So where are you feeling that in your body? Breathe it in, breathe it out. Okay, now we're going to be giving that gift away. We're going to imagine ourselves giving that gift away, and then imagine you're holding the gift and then passing it around. So whenever, like if you're doing movement activities, it's really good to lead up with some points to get to what activity you want to do, then demonstrate it a few times, and then we can do it together along with the music. Thank you. So I would also really love to hear from everybody on this about lessons that you've learned too. I'm sure we've all learned lessons about what's working well and what isn't with virtual programming. So please feel free to add in the chat or Q&A anything that you want to add. I will say, I mentioned before, there are some wonderful silver linings of Zoom. I never thought I would say this, and now I'm on record saying it. So there is some great things that we've come across the way that you can facilitate a program live online. The Zoom features and the layout. So having that meeting format where you can see all of the boxes, it helps with building a sense of community. Participants can see each other and what they're doing. It helps with like spotlighting participants too. So when an activity like that, gift giving, I could call out people. And that's really what our audience have been craving, is like the need to feel seen and heard during this time in COVID. When everybody's been in isolation, that need to feel seen and heard is important. So I could call out, oh, Ellen, I see that. Wow, that must be a big gift. You're really lifting that up. And oh, Bobby, that you're passing that over. I really loved the way that you gently handed it over. So even if you're not calling on them to unmute, you can still honor them by saying what you're seeing in the screen and acknowledging people in the program. You can bring them into the spotlight too. So for one of the programs we had, we encouraged participants to bring a costume and come dressed up in costume. So tell us about your costume and spotlight them, and they can unmute and share. And that's really what a lot have been craving. The ease of captioning too. In-person captioning, you often have tech where you have to set it up either to stream on a phone, or you have a computer screen in the room where you have a captioner providing captions. Zoom has made it pretty easy to set up a captioner. You have a live captioner join you and you just assign them to type captions, or you have the feature that's already embedded into auto captions for Zoom and you just turn it on with a click. You can also change the size of the captions, and you can even pull them out onto a different screen if you need to. The chat functionality has been really wonderful, especially for participants who may not have been comfortable or maybe nonverbal. So that the idea that they are participating in the way they may feel comfortable in the chat and calling out things in the chat, encouraging people in the chat as they're doing things in the program. That's been really wonderful for us. The ability to screen share. With that, you can annotate your screen share. Although, I'll get to this in grows, you may want to turn the annotation feature off for the public. That is a lesson learned. Yeah. Oh, and thanks, Laura acknowledges that this software did not have captioning. Thank you for, you'll be adding captions to the recordings too. Thank you. Screen sharing has been one of the ability to quickly share a performance and then take that off the screen and have an engagement around it. Something really cool about that too. The language interpretation as well. Zoom, I know I talk a lot about that. That is the platform we have chosen to use for our programs. You can have up to, I don't even know, there's like, when I was looking at the languages you can select, there was like 15 or 20 there. So you can have multiple languages at the same time and people can go onto those language channels and listen in their language. Breakout rooms. I'm sorry, I forgot to mention this for our Moments program. We do build in a part of that program for breakout rooms so that you get that same sense of the way it was structured in person where you had a larger group and then you had smaller group workshops. The breakout rooms in Zoom have allowed us to have that smaller group workshop feel so that we can do art making in the smaller workshop space in the breakout room. People often feel more comfortable too speaking in a smaller group than having a larger group and trying to also be seen and heard in a group of like 60 Zoom boxes. You can also turn your camera on and off in Zoom. It is this welcoming for people who don't feel comfortable being seen and that they don't have to be, and they can still participate in the program. The whole being able to participate from wherever. We have adjusted our times. We learned that to have people feel more invited and welcome on the West Coast, for example, having an 11 a.m. program is tough for a lot of audiences. So we've tried to shift a lot of programs. In our spring season, we learned this and tried to shift our Moments programs are almost all, except a few, at 1 p.m. Eastern time. The idea that you can blend live and asynchronous, we can offer people, do it at home on your own pace activities, offering them those Google Sites, and then also having a live virtual season that they can join. Just really our goal is to allow people multiple options and ways of accessing information. Essentially, that is accessibility. It's more than just accommodations. It's allowing people multiple options and ways of accessing information. Sharing video performance links before and after. People can watch at their own time and pace. They can know what to expect, even if they're rewatching the same performance during the live virtual program. That often really is helpful for people who are neurodiverse, knowing what's coming up. And attendance capacity, we have been able to offer so many more people opportunities to these programs, specifically for our Passport to the Arts programming. We're purchasing programming tickets for in-person programs. We have a limited number of physical tickets and physical spaces in that performance space. On Zoom, you can have, I think the max, at least the max we have signed up for on our account is 300. We do want to find a balance between, how can we still get engagement and then invite as many people as possible. So we're still learning on the best number there. But the idea that we don't have as much anxiety around wait lists because we're able to offer more spots for people. And then the artist involvement. The idea that the artists have been so heavily involved in the development and creation of these programs. They've been learning from it. We've been learning from it. There's this understanding and exposure to audiences with disabilities that they can then take into their own work and programming, really empowering them in that. And participants get to directly engage with artists in such a cool way that they may not have experienced in person. If you're in a large performance hall or even in a workshop space with like 60 other physical bodies, it might be hard to get the attention of the artists. Whereas artists on Zoom, they can see that you've had a question in the chat. They can acknowledge that. They can spotlight you and see that you have a question and invite you to respond in the Zoom space. So it's been cool to see too the way that participants are given a more direct line to the artists as well. And then the idea that, as I'm doing now, looking at my notes, that facilitating some of these programs on Zoom can actually be a little easier with scripts. And so you can read from a screen and still look at your camera. Just speaking to from a tech perspective, it's sometimes easier for us as we're juggling other things to have something on a screen and notes that we can just read from too. Any glows that anybody wants to share before I move on? Okay. Some grows for us. Technology, technology, technology. A bunch of stuff as to awesome. It's also been pretty tricky too, and it's definitely been a growth process for us, as well as a lot of the artists and teaching artists that we work with. Some of them have different comfort levels with how they feel facilitating a virtual program on Zoom. There's limitations of sound. So whereas in person you might have everybody, now let's all say this together. Having everybody unmute on Zoom and say everything at the same time can be tricky. We've actually done it a few times where it's worked and people feel heard, but you have to make sure that the audience understands that now we're going to remute, and being able to help them remute themselves too. Knowing when to mute and unmute, difficulty unmuting. So a lot of times too, for our moments audiences, the audiences with dementia and Alzheimer's, they may not be able to figure out how to unmute themselves. We have created Zoom guides that we send out with every virtual program, which is screenshots of how to mute and unmute, where the view is, so you can see gallery view, seeing everybody on the screen, or speaker view, seeing just the speakers and the video. So we're trying to mitigate a lot of that by like sending them guides in advance and making sure they feel comfortable in that knowledge. A lot of times it's still tough. So muting and unmuting for them can be tough. Sometimes too, where we've had artists pre-record some materials for us, if it's not already a production that was recorded, sometimes it can be tricky with the quality of home recordings or them recording in their space. But we've had some real wonderful videos that we've shared, and we've had some amazing live performances too, where there's one person in their space or a few people gathered in the same space and they're performing from there. How many is too many? So we've learned too with our moments programs, we wanted to just kind of have a lot of support on the Lincoln Center staff end to make sure that we had everything covered. So we assigned 4 educators, so 2 teaching artists and 2 music therapists to all of the programs, and facilitating in the planning and development, and then the actual facilitation in the live program. And we've come across like, how many is too many? Are there too many cooks in the kitchen, where you end up having too many and then somebody has nothing to do, or too many different ideas are jumping around? And so really trying to find that sweet spot of not only just the facilitation and planning end, but also with the participants too. I mentioned like, how many can you fit in a room and still have this really deep, meaningful engagement and personalized engagement? I'm just checking the Q&A. And for organizations that are just starting out on developing their accessible programming, what are some good first steps? So I think this is a great question. And Lincoln Center, I acknowledge, is a large organization. We have a lot of support, and we may have a bigger budget than than other organizations. I do want to highlight points of these things that you could set up and organize and do on your own with like limited to no budget. When we first started putting this stuff up, we created Google Sites free. We pulled videos from our YouTube pages that were already up there free. The production of those videos, that's a different story. But the idea is that pulling content from things you already have and using that to build a lesson around, and then facilitating online, either live or asynchronous, meaning like the at-home sites that people can do on their own, is something I think that is a good ease into it, especially if you haven't done these programs and you may want to start out, try some virtually. And then you have also in person, you may need a lot more support and staffing to make sure people feel welcomed into a physical space, to make sure people are there to assist. But with virtual, you may, having two staffers, one to facilitate and one to do the tech, might be enough to facilitate a great live virtual program. And that could be a great start. But I do want to emphasize is just like taking, even for a lot of museums too, taking an object, putting it on the screen, having a conversation about it, building activities around it. And I encourage of thinking when you're building those activities that you're reaching people at that like discussion level, movement level, and art making if possible, so that you're reaching people at all levels. I know that it's 10 after. So some big takeaways. Thanks, Laura. All right, some big takeaways for this are, so one of the biggest things I think that you could do, one of the most helpful things is feedback, and just making sure that you get as much as possible from the audience that you're building this for and knowing what they need. We did end up shifting our efforts and our staff time to live virtual programs after hearing that the standalone sites are not being that used because people are craving the engagement. Also, Google Analytics told us that too. So the idea that knowing when to pivot your efforts and where to pivot that to in the feedback is helpful. Changes in program structure. So if you had an in-person program, I encourage you to try and like learn too. If you wanted to do something as a pilot program too, so getting back to the question about what is a good way to start, having something as a pilot and inviting these audiences to help you in the planning and the feedback and the just working on the structure together is less of a feel than top down. I have this program, come to it, let me know what you think. Also, people are really understanding too if it's a pilot program and you need to shift and change things and change the structure after. And I encourage, this is true for in-person and virtual, but especially for virtual, it is super helpful to rehearse. It helps with the tech end too. The more you practice the spotlight, the screen share, the juggling of videos, it was really tough at the very beginning, but the practice helped a lot. And so on the staffing end, we feel a lot more comfortable with the tech support of artists on virtual programs too. Include access workers. CART, which is the live captioning, American Sign Language, at least involve captioning on there's a lot of like auto caption programs, and it's incorporated into Zoom if you're not able to hire a live captioner. And then just to stay, don't be discouraged. There may be massive drop off. We have massive drop off for a lot of our programs. So we lesson learned about tapering how many people that you really want there, and then upping your registration so that you think you'll hit that number. And free plus virtual plus Zoom fatigue equals probably almost, we've had around like 50% drop off in some cases. So expecting drop off and don't be discouraged by that. And I know finally getting to the question that we had earlier about what is the future. This has been the biggest struggle because, now vaccines are rolling out. People may feel comfortable going back in person, but, and I know it varies state to state, but New York has been very conservative about going back in person. And especially for our participants with disabilities, we want to be very respectful and careful about inviting them back into an in-person space. The image that I have here is across the top of the screen, and it's restart stages at Lincoln Center. And it's these cartoon figures kind of in different poses and active poses and singing and moving and chatting across a leafy green field. And in the background is New York City skyscape. And then some of the buildings that we have on campus, and then the fountain that's at the heart of our campus. We are having this Restart Stages initiative. It's on our main page, which I'm just going to put, which is lincolncenter.org, www.lincolncenter.org. And so the Restart Stages initiative is, we are putting all of these activations on campus where people can come and either hang out on campus, either there's a reading room near the New York Public Library. There will be this kind of grassy area around the fountain, which is kind of represented here. We'll have areas where there are performances live outdoors. We have not opened our indoor stages yet, but we don't know what the future is for in-person. We are for sure going to continue virtual for the foreseeable future, but I think the biggest question I have is, will people want to continue virtual after we return full force in person? So this is a big question we have. And again, that's where our feedback loop is going to come in handy. So building it in, knowing how audiences feel, talking to people, how many are coming virtually. When we continue virtual, expanding outreach then to ensure that if people are coming back in person, the New Yorkers are coming back in person and they don't want virtual, can we at least expand our outreach so that people who can't physically come to Lincoln Center can still reach our programming virtually? This was my last slide. So if there are any questions. Really appreciate you all taking the time with me today. And this was recorded, so you'll be able to see this online. And thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'll stick around for a few more minutes if anybody wants to ask questions. Thank you, Drew. Sorry, Jim. Thank you, Alan and Jenny, too. Thank you.